Okay, we'll go one before, please. It is the right one. That was me when I was a bit younger. Okay. Great. Hi. How are you all? Good, good. I thought I was going to be presenting in the Seaside Lawns, and so I was already out there on the hot stage, and then I got a notice about 10 minutes ago that I've changed rooms, but I'm delighted to be in here, not just with this large audience, but also with the air conditioning, which is fantastic. So what I'm going to be doing very briefly is talking about how we can use neuroscience to build happy and engaged workplaces. Who's excited about that? Yeah, brilliant. So we've got some people in the room who are really interested about the brains. Clearly, in 30 minutes, I can only do a very high level on the brain. So it's just a top-level picture of the brain and how we can indeed embrace brain science to think about happiness. I'm going to just give you a high level around that. We do have a stall outside, so please do come and talk to us outside if you're wanting to know more information. So this is me. And I won't rattle through it. I've just to say that I have many years of experience working across the whole learning arena, and I've been consulting for 17 years, and I'm here, delighted to be here in Mumbai with my business partner, Alistair, as well. And please do come and make yourself known to us, and we can talk to you and get to know you personally. I've recently, delighted to say, published a book as well, which will bring to you a number of interventions and activities around neuroscience and using it within the HR arena, and specifically in one-to-one work and in coaching. Okay, what I want you to do is to take 10 seconds. I know you've just had this lovely, relaxing time before, but 10 seconds for yourself to think about something joyful or wonderful in your life that has happened already. Just 10 seconds. And it will now come as no surprise that I'm going to ask you just to share that with a neighbour. 30 seconds each way. Okay? Start now. Share your wonderful moment with your neighbour. Hi. Okay, time to swap. Wonderful. So, what did you feel when you were sharing? Just shout out some words to me. Anyone? Happy. Great. Any other words? Smiling. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I did notice, despite the fact that I've got this big light in my face, I noticed that the energy was changing in the room. And I noticed that people had smiles on their face because what you were doing was you were accessing memories. Yeah, if you followed just a simple instruction, you were thinking of something joyful that had happened to you before. It was real to you. And then you had the opportunity to share it. How fantastic is that? So we did lots of this amazing stuff and smiling in the room. It's a great place to start this part of the afternoon and these presentations. So what are we really wanting at work? I know I've got a room full of people from the HR arena here. Do we want this? Do we want engaged employees? Do we want productive employees? Do we want satisfied employees? Who wants to put their hands up for that? Yeah? Yeah, so 3 of you do. Okay, so we do want this at work. Or do we? Let's think about this in a different way. Do we want happy employees? Yeah, okay, so I'm sensing, because I've got some noise coming from the front rows, I'm sensing that you know that there's a difference. You know, happy employees will drive engagement, they will drive satisfaction, and they will drive productivity, yeah? But not necessarily the other way around. I just want to give you a definition from the CIPD, which I know many of you are familiar with. The CIPD is the professional body for human resources that works out of the UK, and it's a great definition around engagement. but it's about engagement from gathering survey data. People are operating in the front part of their brain, the prefrontal cortex, the thinking bit, not the emotional happy bit when they're answering these questions. But it's a good one. It really is, being positively present during the performance of work, willingly contributing intellectual effort, and experiencing those positive emotions and meaningful connections. It's a good one, but it still doesn't look to happiness. I can't see that word embedded there anyway. So what I want to introduce you to this afternoon, that I hope as HR people that you will be able to use, is some work from some psychologists. You can read it yourself, Parks, Schuller, and Tasami, who talk about 3 facets that make up for happiness. Now, they've drawn this work from a meta-study of around about 150 other positive psychology studies. So it's really empirical. It's really well-researched. And it's all around grabbing that psychological data around human behavior for what makes for happiness. So the rest of my presentation this afternoon is I'm going to be giving you a little bit of depth around these psychological areas, what they mean by those 3 things, because they're slightly different than perhaps our definition in the English language, and then also relating it to neuroscience. So a little bit at very high level, very, very speedy, because we're at that really wonderful stage in our lives now in 2020 where we've got that meeting of minds now between psychology and neuroscience. So psychology has been around for many, many years, and observational psychology has been responsible for our understanding of human behavior by looking at how people are and how people behave. And now with the advent of technology and fMRI scanning, we're now able to take a look inside the brains of healthy, functioning human beings and perhaps answer that question about why we are the way we are. What is it that gives us that building block to emanate in that human behavior? So if you like, I like to use the metaphor of the psychology is about the house that you're looking at. You're looking at the building. Neuroscience and the physiology is giving us some information about the foundations that hold up the house. And we're now in this wonderful place of shaking the hands between psychology and neuroscience. So I want you to play with me for 2 minutes, and I may even have done this last year, so some of you will be familiar with this. I want to talk about the human brain and get us familiar with this thing that is this 3-pound mass of jelly that is sitting inside our heads that consists of 86 billion neurons that are all doing something. What I'd like you to do is to hold up your right arm, like President Trump did a few years ago, but we're not doing an oath of office here. Right, and what I'd like to do is use the metaphor of the arm, if you like, or the physical arm, because I'm getting you doing something, to talk about the human brain. So, this part of the brain, this arm bit, keep it up because it keeps our energy high. This represents our reptile brain. Some of you will be familiar with the terminology of lizard brain. In human beings, this is about regulating our body without thinking about it. So it's about our blood pressure, our oxygen levels, how often we blink, all of that sort of stuff. We don't really use it for conscious thinking. Form a fist now. And what this does is this represents our limbic system. The limbic system is required for empathy. It is the seat of our emotions. Some of you may have heard of this, referred to as the mammal brain. Here's the difference between mammals and reptiles. Mammals, when they are born, have to suckle on their mother. They're reliant and dependent on their mother. So all of a sudden, as we evolved, we had to have that emotional bonding with our parent, whereas snakes are just born and off they go into the wild world. And if they die, they die. Now I'd like you to overlay, and then you can stop playing, your other hand over, and this you can put it down after now. Thank you for playing. This represents our neocortex, which is where all of our conscious thinking starts to take place. And it's about complexity, complex social relationships. It's where our grey matter resides. Despite the slightly orange colour, it's where our grey matter resides. Most importantly, and what makes us uniquely human, is this bit at the front, the frontal lobes. You may have heard of the prefrontal cortex. This actually takes up only 2.5% of our brains, 2.5% of the neurons, but it is what makes us uniquely human. It allows us to think ahead, to plan, to strategize, strategize, to forward think and aspire and dream about the future and think, bring everything together. Now, here's the thing, and this is why I asked you to play with me. 80% of our brain cells are in the non-thinking subconscious part of the brain. They're in the ancient brain. That's an extraordinary number. And so what we tend to do in our employee engagement programs is we talk to the prefrontal cortex. We talk to the conscious thinking, the rational part of the brain. We don't talk to the ancient brain. So what I want to do is to be able to link these three wonderful areas from the psychology meta-studies to neuroscience to help us as HR professionals understand how we can take some evidence from the physiology to enable us to grow happiness, that softer word, and appeal, if you like, to more of the emotional part of the brain. So I'm going to go really quickly because I know I'm on a timeline here. What I want to do is to build an understanding of the psychologist's definition of those words beyond the English language. So let's start with enjoyment. So enjoyment all about activating the brain's reward areas. Now, I'm going to wave a metaphorical red flag here. We do not have a lump in the brain that is responsible for reward and pleasure. It's all about the transport mechanism throughout the brain. It takes neurotransmitters, dopamine, around the brain to various parts of the brain where we experience pleasure. That's called the nucleus accumbens, the ventral tegmental area. We don't need to actually know that. But there are parts of the brain that when we feel pleasure, when we feel rewarded, that we'll get activated and we get that dopamine boost in our system. It makes us feel good. Guess what? We do it again. Yeah? And that's how we build happy habits, if you like, or perhaps some sabotaging habits as well, good and bad habits. So what enjoyment is, from the psychologist's definition, it's about positive emotions. What we can do to draw out positive emotions from the past, the present, and the future. So when we're thinking about the past, like you did 10 minutes ago in that quick introductory exercise, we're thinking about when we were proud, contented, satisfied, or really enjoying life, maybe even serenity, maybe really peaceful. What we're thinking about in the present, in the definition of enjoyment, is about savoring, being in the moment, savoring, maybe having some fun. You know, we're enjoying ourselves in the moment and having some fun. Hedonism as well. So maybe anybody enjoy going to a party and having some beer? No one. Right, I'm sure we do. Or we enjoy a cup of coffee with some chocolate. That's hedonism. You know, it's just taking something for gratification. It's great. We're enjoying ourselves in the moment. And that is filling up our dopaminergic pathways. And thinking about the future. Future enjoyment is about hope. It's about optimism. It's about faith, and it's about confidence. So let's move it to something practical for you in HR. How can we take this knowledge and move it into something that you can actually do? So this is about you now amplifying your work with emotional work with your people. How can you get them to recall your teams and people in your business? How can you get them to recall proud memories? How can you celebrate? Why don't you just start off meetings with a celebration? You know, a celebration of what we've learned, how we've progressed. You don't need to get an A or an A star to celebrate. Getting a B or a C may be just as worthy of celebration. It may be. And the learning that comes from it, that we weren't perfect this time. We're not perfect. We need to learn and progress. So share pride and achievement with the team. Appreciation and gratitude. You'll probably have read about gratitude journaling. It really helps to calm the brain in the moment, not just make you grateful for everything around you, but release serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter around mood regulation, so it helps us calm. Anybody heard of this little graphic at the bottom called Pecha Kucha? No? So maybe a couple of you. It's about photographs. Yeah, absolutely. Pecha Kucha is a process that came from Japan. It actually initiated from some Japanese designers, some architects who wanted to find a very quick way of sharing their work in a very engaging and enjoyable way. And I've had the joy of being able to experience this in a team context. and it's on a 20-20 matrix or a 10-by-10 matrix. So you have 20 photographs of your personal life or things that are important to you, and you have 20 seconds to be able to talk about them. Yeah, that takes up too much time for some companies because it's 6 minutes and 40 seconds. So sometime now, you'll experience people with everybody in their team doing a 10-by-10. 10 pictures, 10 seconds to describe it. It's fabulous. Try doing that with the teams or your colleagues. You know, no words on the pictures, just pictures. A great way to do it. So that's number one, enjoyment. Yeah? Ready to go to the sequel, number two? Yeah, absolutely. Number two, engagement. This is the psychologist's definition of what makes up for engagement. There are three facets in engagement: strengths, flow, and novelty. And I'm going to talk to you those very briefly from a neuroscientific perspective. So, why have I got a map of Mumbai on when I'm talking first of all about strengths? Well, I'll tell you. I'm sure that you are familiar with the term neural pathways. And what I like to look at from a brain perspective, I like to think about the brain as though it's a road network. And what better than to think about renewing the road network in Mumbai, that very traffic-heavy city with all of those amazing vehicles that are blocking the roads all the time. Imagine you had the opportunity to recreate Mumbai from scratch. Imagine you had the opportunity to lay down a new traffic system, and then a few years later to examine it and see if you could improve it. What you would find is that some of the roads would need widening because there's too much traffic on it. Some of the roads aren't used at all, so you would perhaps make them smaller, or turn them even into bicycle paths. Some of the roads have average use, so they're just A roads. It's the same with our brain. Our neural pathways develop into a superhighway in our brain, into a motorway, into an A road, or into a bicycle path. And here's the thing. Neuroscientists know that we only access around 60% of our brain at any one time, so we're not using everything. We develop strengths for going down our motorways in our brain. They give rise to our preferences, which gives rise to our strengths. And we will access those more readily. So, as an HR person, it's all about how can you think about utilizing your person to enable them to use their strengths? Because when they're using their strengths, they're most likely operating at their most engaged and at their best. In our business, we actually have a model, please come to talk to us about this, for measuring those strengths based on neuroscience. I can't go through this in detail now, but it gives us a language for those neural pathway strengths and preferences. Secondly, flow. I've just realized how red-faced this guy is. Now, who's heard of flow before? Yeah, somebody on the front row, and yes, both at the front tables have heard of flow. So this Hungarian psychologist, Professor, here we go, Mckay, he has come up with the concept of flow, and it's very empirically based, his research that sits behind flow. You can read the definition yourself. It's where people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. You're engrossed. You're really engaged in it. The experience is so enjoyable that people will continue to do it even at great cost for the sheer sake of doing it. Have you ever experienced that? When you're so involved in your work, it just feels fantastic, and all of a sudden you look up and 5 hours have gone. It's really quite incredible. So what flow does is it's very interesting. It puts us in a stable state. Yeah, we're not excited, we are calm. Our brain, again, it's around that serotonin sort of mood regulator, and our brain is calm, and we're able to, almost like mindfulness, we're able to really focus on the here and now. And Professor Mckay also says is that the secret to a happy life is to learn to be engaged in as many new things as possible. So acting and looking at keeping the novel brain, the newness side and the variety side of the brain at play is really useful for making sure you're optimizing absolutely everything in your brain. I want to share with you some research from the University of Rochester about novelty and routine. what happens? If you're given something new to do, it activates the prefrontal cortex, because you're having to think about it because it's something new, and the right side, the more creative part of your neural pathways, which is great. It's engaging those creative ideas generating part of the brain. And then when something becomes practiced, what happens is that it goes to the left-hand side of the brain, which is where, at its very simplest level, the rules are. The rules are for operating on the left-hand side of the brain. So what we're talking about in flow is keeping your brain active all the way through by using all elements of the brain, by keeping novel and variety-based activities front of house. Yeah. So that's all very well. What can we do as HR folk? So absolutely, it is about providing opportunities for your people to use their strengths every single day. Why do we recruit for strengths and we develop for gaps? You know, I mean, let's think about that. We can talk about that later. Allocate work across the team for strengths. Cultivate those passions for flow. And give novel work to enrich the learning. The last one, the sequel of the sequel, the purpose, sense of purpose. Now, I know when I was originally in the Seaside Lawns room, the gentleman who was following me in the presentation was going to be talking about sense of purpose. I'm not sure whether it fits on the agenda, but you will hear the words purpose many times during this Happiness Congress. Viktor Frankl, neurologist and psychologist, but also an experiencer of the Holocaust. He's experienced more suffering than many of us, or any of us, will experience of a lifetime, and I really like what he says here. Even more people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. From a neurological and psychological basis, it really helps to have that sense of purpose. So, the picture is people in a waiting room. I believe that many of us, as human beings, we're sitting in the waiting room of purpose. We don't know our why. And if it's the one thing we can do to help our people in work is to help them identify that why. So purpose, very quickly, I'm seeing movement in front of me. Purpose actually makes us biologically more resilient. Research shows that people with a sense of purpose are less likely to experience a stroke. And that's extraordinary. They have stronger immune systems, so they're less likely to have those age-related diseases. And neuroscientists call purpose as the happiness trifecta. So you are releasing these three fabulous neurotransmitters: dopamine for motivation and reward, oxytocin for bonding and connection, and serotonin for stabilization of mood. Okay. I'll quickly touch this. I've got a couple more that I can miss out in the future. I know when I came into the room you were doing a meditation. There is scientific proof that meditation is good for your brain, and I want to translate this to why HR people need to integrate it within their thought process. The picture is of some shoelaces. There are these things in your brain that are the caps on the chromosomes. They're protective caps on chromosomes, just like the corrective, those caps at the end of the shoelaces. What happens if you're under stress is they shorten. They also naturally shorten as you get older, but stress accelerates the shortenings of your telomeres, and that ages you quicker. What we know is that meditation helps to elongate them, and it helps you to recover from the shortening of those. If you are stressed and your telomeres are shortening, then you are aging biologically, from a neurological perspective, more quickly, and you're more prone, therefore, to age-related disease. Here's what we need to do at work, as I'm coming to the end. Try and understand the why, what your people are motivated by and their sense of purpose. Try to create that shared narrative so you can link them into that sense of purpose of the organization. Really communicate well so they understand their contribution. You know, how many of us in an organization really understand where their work contributes in? Yeah, I'm not going to run all through them. Be super aware of stress. Please, please, please. If it's not meditation time, give time for reflection and that calming of the brain. I'll move over that quickly. So, in summary, we've talked about the research from psychology and linked it at a super high level to neuroscience. Enjoyment get into the reward and pleasure centers of the brain. Engagements, strengths, flow, and new variety. Purpose is about biological resilience and stress reduction. Here's a final point. Happiness isn't an HR program. Yeah? A joyful life is an individual creation that cannot be copied from a recipe. We only are really responsible for our own happiness, but we as HR professionals can create an environment for happiness that is additive and joyful and that will result in satisfaction, engagement, and productivity. So let's keep smiling, and I'd love to connect with you all. Please come and visit us. We're literally on that side of the wall there. Please link with me. I post every day on LinkedIn apart from Saturday and Sunday, so there's always something there, and it would be fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much for your attention. Did I make my 25 minutes? Absolute pleasure.